May 13, 1862. Charleston Harbor is a cage of iron and stone. To the north, Fort Sumter, the very cradle of the Confederacy, bristles with heavy artillery. To the south, the Union blockade sits 10 miles out, a ghost fleet of salvation that might as well be on the moon. Between them lies the Planter, a 147-foot Confederate transport ship laden with cannons and ammunition. Its captain is asleep on shore, violating every naval regulation in the book. On the deck stands a 23-year-old man in a floppy straw hat and a stolen linen jacket. He is mimicking the posture of a white man, his back to the shore, his hand on the wheel. This is Robert Smalls. He is currently committing the most audacious act of high seas grand larceny in American history. But this isn't a desperate gamble, it is a synchronized heist. Today, we are deconstructing the life of a man who stole a warship, advised a president, and bought the very house he was born into as a slave. This is the strategy of the ultimate navigator. Robert Smalls was born in 1839 in a small cabin behind the McKee House in Beaufort, South Carolina. His mother, Lydia Polite, was a woman of immense foresight. She saw that her son was favored by his masters, and she feared this comfort would blind him to the reality of his condition. She forced him to witness the public whippings in the town square. She wanted him to understand that in this system, his life had a price, but his mind was his own. At age 12, Robert was sent to Charleston to be hired out. He worked as a lamplighter, a rigger, and a sailmaker, but his eyes were always on the water. He became a wheelman, the enslaved version of a pilot. Because of the law, he couldn't hold the official title of pilot, but he possessed the technical monopoly on the harbor. He memorized every sandbar, every shifting current, and every secret signal of the Confederate Navy. He wasn't just working, he was conducting geographic reconnaissance. By 1862, Robert Smalls knew the Charleston waters better than the men who claimed to own him. He had turned himself into an indispensable piece of infrastructure. The strategy for the Planter heist relied on identity mimicry. Smalls had spent months observing Captain Charles J. Relier. He didn't just watch his orders, he watched his silhouette. He noticed that at a distance, in the pre-dawn fog, the captain was identified by two things: his gait and his signature straw hat. On the night of the escape, Smalls waited for the white officers to go ashore. He then gathered the other enslaved crew members. This was the first hurdle of operational security. If one man talked, they would all hang. Smalls convinced them that the risk of death was secondary to the certainty of freedom. At 3 a.m. they lit the boilers. They made a secret stop at the North Atlantic Wharf to pick up their wives and children, a massive risk that added contraband weight to the ship. As they approached Fort Sumter, Smalls donned the captain's hat. He stood on the bridge, arms folded, precisely mimicking Relier's posture. He gave the correct whistle signals, 3 long, shrill blasts and a quick hiss. The sentry at the fort looked out, saw the captain, and waved them through with a shout, "Blow the damned Yankees to hell!" Smalls' reply was a masterpiece of tactical calm. "Aye, aye, sir." As the Planter cleared the range of Confederate guns, Smalls hauled down the palmetto flag and raised a white bedsheet. He was heading straight for the USS Onward. The Union sailors, seeing a Confederate ship charging toward them, nearly opened fire. But Smalls' timing was perfect. As the ships drew near, he famously shouted, "I am Robert Smalls, and I have brought you the Planter. I thought she might be of some use to Uncle Abe." Smalls didn't just bring a ship. He brought intellectual intelligence. He turned over the Confederate codebooks, the locations of sea mines, torpedoes, and a detailed map of the harbor's weaknesses. Overnight, he became the Union's most valuable asset in the South. This was the information dividend that changed the naval war in South Carolina. In August 1862, Smalls was sent to Washington, D.C. He wasn't there as a curiosity, he was there as a lobbyist. He met with Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and President Abraham Lincoln. At this point in the war, Lincoln was still hesitant to enlist black soldiers. He feared the political fallout in the border states. Smalls presented a pragmatic argument. We will be better soldiers because we are fighting for our freedom. He wasn't appealing to Lincoln's morality, he was appealing to his military logic. Smalls's success with the planter was the proof of concept Lincoln needed. Shortly after this meeting, Stanton issued the order to begin enlisting the first official black regiments in South Carolina. Smalls personally recruited over 5,000 men. He understood that the only way to secure their freedom was to become the primary stakeholders in the Union's victory. Smalls returned to the planter, now as a Union pilot. During a fierce engagement at Folly Island, the white captain of the ship panicked under heavy Confederate fire and hid in the coal bunker. Smalls didn't hesitate. He took the wheel, steered the ship out of the kill zone, and saved the crew. For this act of valor, he was promoted to captain of the planter, becoming the first African American to command a United States vessel. He served in 17 major battles, using his knowledge of the coast to conduct asymmetrical naval warfare. He was the ghost of the Low Country, a man the Confederates put a $4,000 bounty on. They couldn't catch him because he was playing on a map he had already mastered. When the war ended in 1865, Smalls didn't leave the South. He moved back to Beaufort and began his third act, political consolidation. He founded the Republican Party of South Carolina and was a lead delegate at the 1868 Constitutional Convention. He understood that freedom without infrastructure was a trap. He authored the legislation that created the first free public school system in the history of the South. He argued that literacy was the ultimate weapon against re-enslavement. His strategy was to build a black paradise in the Sea Islands, a place where land ownership and education would create an unshakable foundation for black power. From 1875 to 1887, Smalls served 5 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. But this wasn't a time of peace. This was the era of the Red Shirts and the White League, paramilitary groups dedicated to using terror to end Reconstruction. Smalls' life was constantly at risk. He would travel with an armed escort of his own veterans. In Congress, he focused on economic defense. He pushed for internal improvements for the South, realizing that economic growth in his district would make his constituents harder to displace. He was a master of fusion politics, often making strategic deals with moderate Democrats to protect his base. He was called the King of Beaufort because his political machine was so efficient that even the KKK struggled to dismantle it. Perhaps the most poetic move in Smalls' entire life happened in 1864. While the war was still raging, the McKee House, the very house where Smalls was born into slavery, went up for auction because the owners had failed to pay their taxes. Robert Smalls walked into that auction and bought the house for $605. He lived in that mansion for the rest of his life, but his final strategic move was one of radical empathy. When the former Mrs. McKee returned to the house years later, suffering from dementia and believing she still lived there, Smalls didn't evict her. He allowed her to stay in her old room until she died. He had won so completely that he could afford to be merciful. He had turned the master's house into a monument to his own triumph. Robert Smalls died in 1915 on the same property where he began as property. He lived through the peak of the Civil War, the hope of Reconstruction, and the darkness of Jim Crow. His message was simple: my race needs no special defense. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. He taught us that strategy isn't just about winning the battle, it's about navigating the tide. He was a pilot to the very end. If you want to see the next chapter in our Strategists series, like and subscribe. This is Lives in Time.